Hello and welcome to Adventures in Coriolis. Today the adventure brings us to the Lincoln Memorial here in Washington, D.C. So come on, let's get this adventure started. Lincoln Memorial pays homage to the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Now, of course, Lincoln being one of the most prominent and important presidents in our country's history, it took a while to sort of get this memorial going. Of course, it faced a lot of opposition in Congress, in the various committees, and actually just becoming legislation to begin building the structure for a couple reasons. One being the siting, where exactly it would be located, and for two, sort of the design. A lot of things surrounding the design, from the statue of Abraham Lincoln inside to what the memorial itself would even look like. Pretty much for the first few years of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, this thing was kicked around Congress, and finally, I think around 1914, they finally got the okay to start constructing it. The memorial itself was actually dedicated in 1922 by President William G. Harding. President Lincoln was born on February 12th, 1909. And so in 1922, he would have been well over 100 years old. So, of course, he was assassinated when he was about 56 years old. So the only surviving child that he had, and I guess next closest kin, when this memorial was dedicated to his memory, was his son, Robert Todd Lincoln, who was 78 years old. He actually attended in 1922. So pretty interesting when you put history into perspective like that. At the time of filming this video in February of 2021, in fact, it's just around President's Day and Lincoln's birthday. But this year actually makes 212 years since the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Now, a little bit about the design of the Lincoln Memorial. If you look at it, of course, it's known for the columns. And it's a pretty interesting structure. It's actually probably one of the most known structures in the world, and definitely a prominent structure for the city of Washington, D.C. When you think of the National Mall, of course, you have the Lincoln Memorial here on the west side, you have the Washington Monument in the middle, and then you have the Capitol building over on the east end. There are 38 columns here on the Lincoln Memorial. These all represent each of the 38 states which were part of the Union at the time of Lincoln's death. Now, up at the top, you actually see the lower level here. These are actually the names of those 38 states that were part of the Union at the time of Lincoln's death. And then up at the top, you can also see jutting upward there another level. Those also contain the names of states. However, there are actually 48 names on that level, because those are the names of the 48 United States at the time of the dedication of the memorial in 1922. Of course, the two that were missing, the only two that were missing, were Alaska and Hawaii, as those did not become states until the 1950s. Now, of course, the Lincoln Memorial is prominently known as a memorial to President Abraham Lincoln. It's also been the site surrounding a lot of events that occurred in history surrounding race relations. In fact, as we walk up the stairs here, we're going to see the spot that in 1963, during the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. stood and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. So that's pretty cool, and I'll note that as we walk up the stairs here. So let's go. Let's start our ascent up the many, many stairs. You can see behind me here as we walk, right there, the Washington Monument. You can also see the U.S. Capitol building, and then of course the reflecting pool between here and the Washington Monument. So just a pretty cool monument to visit. The view from up here is pretty stellar. So when you get here to this middle landing, before you start to go up the ivory steps, you'll see here right in the middle, it's wet right now so it's harder to see, but there's actually a placard engraved where Martin Luther King Jr. stood and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And this would have been the view he had. Standing here in the shadow of Abraham Lincoln, his statue is directly behind me right now, up in the memorial, with thousands and thousands of people on the National Mall that day to hear Dr. King give his famous speech. Now, inside the memorial itself, it's actually broken up into sort of 3 sections. This first section, and they're each sort of cordoned off from more rows of columns. This first section here behind me, you can see engraved on the wall, is portion of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Of course, one of the most famous speeches that he ever gave, of course, but also one of the most famous speeches perhaps given in United States history to date. So it's pretty hallowing to be here to see the statue of Abraham Lincoln, to see these words on the wall behind me, and then to be able to look out and see Washington, D.C., and sort of the world that is now. It's an amazing shrine and memorial to what was an amazing president. And behind me here you can see the famous statue of Abraham Lincoln as he is seated here in the Lincoln Memorial, and as he looks out across Washington, D.C., out across the front of the memorial, he can look across the National Mall, facing the Washington Monument, and down through the U.S. Capitol building. This statue of Lincoln is actually about 19 foot tall, and if he stood up, interesting fact, if he were to stand up, not only would that be absolutely terrifying, but he'd also be about 28 feet tall, just sort of in proportion. So that I'm sure that he would be touching or piercing the roof if he were to stand up, because as you can see, it's a pretty large statue. Some people have theorized that the way his hands are positioned sort of are sign language for A and L for Abraham Lincoln. And of course, the inscription, "In this temple is in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." So now we've been in the first sort of portion or section of the memorial, and the second where the statue of Abraham Lincoln is. And now this is the third behind me here, inscribed on the wall, is part of Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address. So those are pretty much the 3 sections of the inside of the memorial. Now if I pan around here, right here behind me, there's actually a gift store where you can get some Lincoln Memorial and also Washington, D.C. memorabilia. So check that out. It's just right inside. Here's where you come into the memorial, up the steps from the mall, and then right here is where you have that gift shop. So check it out and get some gifts to remember your visit here to the Lincoln Memorial when you come to Washington, D.C. This is one of my favorite places to visit in Washington, D.C. I think of all the monuments and memorials a lot because it's pretty cool to see Lincoln sitting up there. And as I was visiting, and as I've visited other times, you know, you hear a lot of people remark like, wow, it looks a lot smaller in real life than it does in like movies and pictures and stuff. That's pretty remarkable, but also another remarkable thing about this memorial is the views that you have. Of course, I've shown you the view back here, looking out over the Washington D.C., the National Mall. You can see the Washington Monument. But also, we're going to walk around back here, and I'm going to show you a pretty cool view, especially if you're here around sunset. You can't beat the view that you're going to get off the back of the Lincoln Memorial. It looks out over Arlington, Virginia, and also over Arlington National Cemetery, and the views are just spectacular. And we're here right around sunset today, so you'll be able to see a little bit of what I'm talking about, but it's not to be missed. So if you have time in your trip, or if you can schedule it just so that you can be up here around sunset, I don't think you're going to regret it, because, well, just take a look for yourself. Now just over the bridge over there, you see all these cars coming. That's actually Arlington National Cemetery right over there So this is Arlington Memorial Bridge, and it does run from Washington, D.C. over the Potomac River. You can see there in the middle. And then once you get across the river, you're actually into Arlington and out of Washington, D.C. So the Lincoln Memorial actually sets just right on the very inside of Washington, D.C. It's one of the first things you'll come to if you come over this particular bridge to get into the district. Another cool thing about where this memorial is that it's on the final approach for Reagan National Airport. So you can come here and watch planes as they arrive into the capital city. Another remarkable thing to remember when you're here and you're seeing that statue of Abraham Lincoln up there, and he's looking out over the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We're only a mile or two from the White House where he would have resided during his presidency. And also, we're only 2 to 3 miles from Ford's Theater, which is the place where he was assassinated. And of course, the house across the street from there where he later died. I highly recommend that if you are visiting and you have time in your schedule, that you do take the Ford's Theater tour. I'm not sure now during the pandemic, the hours and operations and everything like that, but it's a great tour to go on, especially if you are interested in Abraham Lincoln and his life and his presidency, or just a fan of American history. It's a must-see. It's actually one of my favorite things to do in the city. It's just really cool, and the way that tour is set up is really awesome. May even bookend it with a visit to the Lincoln Memorial that day, just to put everything into perspective. But it's a pretty cool tour, so check that out. Lastly, if you are coming to visit the Lincoln Memorial, you are within just walking distance, very close walking distance, of a couple of other monuments behind me here. And I'm just on the left side of the memorial. If you're at the memorial, on the left side you have the Vietnam Memorial behind me, and then over here on the other side have the Korean War Memorial. So there are a couple of memorials that are very close. If you walk down a bit toward the Washington Monument, you're actually going to get to the World War II Memorial before you get to the Washington Monument. So a lot of things to see, not only the Lincoln Memorial, but a lot of the memorials and monuments surrounding it. Just a very cool part of the National Mall, a must-see if you're coming to Washington, D.C., so don't miss the Lincoln Memorial. That's going to do it for our time here at the Lincoln Memorial. I hope you enjoyed this vlog. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel. Have a lot of awesome adventures coming up for you this year. Very excited to show you all of those and to get out and exploring again in 2021. Please share the video with your family and friends if you enjoyed it, so that they can come along on these adventures with us. And until next time, thank you for watching.